I listened to Hossein for 3 minutes and I'm already waiting for his presentation. We have kind of like discussed what we call History 101 in 1.5 hours. And I've burdened you with lots of details perhaps about history. But just to put things in perspective, it's important to understand sometimes the roots of certain things, how they evolve, and where we are. Because, as Charles just mentioned, there's something very interesting about the conceptual understanding today of our discussion about race, about hatred, about otherness, and so on, in the context of the liberal state, and in particular within our understanding of what we call multicultural societies. And it is quite remarkable in that respect that it is exactly in this era when we have seen the rise of anti-Semitism in liberal societies under the pretext of defending multiculturalism. This is quite remarkable. Which means that the progressive wings, on the one hand, both in the United States, Corbanites in this country, and many other places, are adopting the language of anti-Semitism under the guise of attacking Israel. We do not attack Jews, but we attack Israel. Separating between Israel supposedly and the Jewish people, under the disguise or under the argument that Jews do not deserve to govern themselves, because if they want to govern themselves, they want to be too powerful, while we recognize them as powerless in the multicultural society. Confusing, but that's exactly it. You will find in the same manner anti-Semitism perhaps rising on the far right from a completely different perspective, charging the Jewish people or Jews to be too universalists, too soft on multiculturalists who are debunking what is America the way we envision it, making America great again. So either you're attacking the Jews for being too universal, or you're attacking them for being what we call people with dual loyalty, too loyal to Israel. Which means that there is a large scope of basically dealing with issues pertaining to the liberal society by addressing the Jews. By using the Jews as kind of like a code word. For example, attacking George Soros. George Soros is a universalist. So there is kind of like the capitalist market. Here is the Jews who have no commitment to local issues. So who is attacking? Those who are on the left, attacking those George Soros people, money. Jews are money. So George Soros represents money, even though he donates only to liberal causes, but that's a different story. So they attack George Soros, and George Soros is becoming the nemesis of Israel in the minds and hearts of the Israeli nationalists. You know, like he debunks Israeli nationalism because of that. It's very confusing, but you can attack the Jewish cause, whatever it means, both on the left and on the right. For too much loyalty to the tribe, or too much loyalty to universal causes at the expense of our nation, the American nation, the French nation, the German nation, etc. This has been throughout modernity. In that respect, anti-Semitism captures the entire gamut. And then, of course, you have the old anti-Semitism that comes with Islamic radicalism. Islamic radicalism articulates a blunt notion of the Jews as a debased people, that's supposed to be killed. This is the radical Islamism. These are the people of evil. These are the people that we're supposed basically to debunk and demise. Now, all of this language, as I said, meet the Jewish people in a very interesting juncture. On the one hand, they have a powerful state. Powerful in the sense that it is growing, prospering, its economics is doing very well, its people are doing quite well, it's growing population-wise. Israel is the fastest growing population in the West. In the OECD, the fertility rates of Israeli women is quite remarkable, 3.14. The family structure keeps Israel such a powerful, growing nation. And it also meets the Jewish people in the diaspora, seeing themselves more and more integrating into their societies overall, question of assimilation and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, meeting, for example, in Europe, the challenge of New Europe, with growing Islamic communities. As Dominique Schnapper, the philosopher, tells me, there is no longer a Jewish question in Europe, but there is an Islamic question in Europe, how Europe will look like. Or in England with Corbyn, what Corbyn have with the Jews? You know, how many Jews? 300,000 British Jews. Why is it such a big issue? Why the Labour Party is imploding with the question of anti-Semitism and people in the Labour Party are leaving? Because it's almost symbolic to see which issue is debunking the idea of the right wing, which issue resonates with the progressives. Hating Israel became kind of like almost a symbol for doing right for the progressive. I want to explain all of this in the next hour and so. Really to see where we are. It's not so simple to understand sometimes. It's even confusing for many. You look at the news and you see Congresswoman Omar attacking Trump, attacking this, Trump attacking back, and suddenly people ask me, yesterday I gave interview to Social Press, New York Times, how the Jews have been interjected to all of this? Why is it? Is there a debate in America between Trump and the left and so on? Why the Jews are suddenly kind of playing the role? For a variety of reasons, as we will see. Let me begin by saying that the condition, or what we call the Jewish condition in the West, of course, was such in the late 19th century that people thought that the Western civilization somehow will solve the issue of the Jewish condition, unattainable Jewish condition in Eastern Europe and Western Europe in America. America was the promised land. Just as America was supposed to be the promised land, even for slaves eventually. Emancipation, the rise of African American, the rise to power, eventually supposed to make America a home for everybody. America is the dream home for everybody when there are no minorities, rather there is a multicultural society. Creating a society, a nation of all nations. And the Jewish people jumped on the opportunity, as I suggest. Especially after they found out that there is no really prospects in modernity for other places. Sovereignty and the creation of an independent state was not a solution yet. It was a late solution. For the vast majority of East European Jews in the Russian Empire, America was, of course, the solution after they suddenly suffered from pogroms in 1880-81, after the assassination of the Tsar, Alexander II. Massive migration to the United States. Massive. 2.5 million, in fact, from 81 to 1914. By 1997, New York City became a Jewish city. And America was supposed to deliver the promise, because America even though it was created by the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but it was changing its nature to become a land of the free. Everybody could be a citizen of the United States and claim ownership. Canada in a different fashion, Australia, but a different fashion. European Jews who felt that that may be the case in France and in Germany woke up to the realities that that will never be the case. In East European, anti-Semitism was still manifesting itself in the old type of anti-Semitism, the Christian type of anti-Semitism, the Russian church, etc., etc. In Western Europe, especially in Germany, and of course in France later on, the Jews were the significant minority other threatening us. Despite huge efforts of the Jews to integrate into Germany and despite the Emancipation Proclamations, the Emancipation Proclamation, which was first in 1789, in Germany it changed, as you very well know, even though Germany was supposedly accepting emancipation, but it was accepting emancipation initially just because Napoleon imposed it on Germany. When Napoleon retreated, it took Germany a lot of time to reinstate emancipation. The Jews in Germany felt that Germany is the home. They were trying to create the theology, the Judaism itself, in part and parcel of Protestant Germany. They were eager to join the German army, to shed blood for the nation, because shedding blood for the nation gives you access to the nation. Shed blood and shed blood, remember that. It's a different story. When you shed blood, you're supposedly loyal to the nation. When Hitler came to power, Jews submitted to him a book with statistics showing him how Jews basically died in World War I much more than any other segment of the German population, as a way of showing total loyalty to the nation. Developed all the theology for Germany, becoming the quintessential Germans. But of course the Nazi Germany did not accept the idea of loyalty at that nature, because loyalty became identified with race. Anti-Semitism morphed into racism. It was already like that with Fichte in the 19th century, but it became official. So Germany was not in any fashion a solution. It took time for the Jews to realize that. Until Europe became a graveyard of anti-Semitism. Herzl warned about it in a different fashion, didn't understand how calamity will hit. The United States, on the other hand, was supposed to be the salvation. Zionists, however, believed that there is no salvation just in the United States. We must have a home of our own in order to solve the issue of anti-Semitism. When Herzl went to leaders of the world to ask for sovereignty for the Jews, he told them, we're going to solve your problem, not our own. You're going to get rid of us. You should be happy about it. Give us a home. What happened is, when Israel was created, there was an imbalance among the Jews after the Holocaust. One was a very small sovereign state of 680,000 people. And of course, there were about another 11 million people still in other countries, majority of whom were now in the United States, in Canada, and some who were still left in Europe, and many in the Arab states, in the Muslim states, what we call Mizrahi Jews. The creation of the State of Israel and the centrality of statehood became an outcry for lots of issues in the world, for example. Jews were questions, where is their home? Is your home in Palestine or is your home in our midst? For example, Jews in the Arab world were very quickly became entangled in the struggle between Israel in the Arab world in the War of Israel of Independence in 1948. 700,000 of them had to move as refugees because they were attacked. as potential loyalists of the new state of Israel or claimed loyalists. In the Soviet Union, Jews were immediately subjected to even more viral anti-Semitism, this time as charged as loyalists to Zionism. Prior to that, they were charged just as traitors for all the causes you want. So anti-Semitism became also for Zionism the vehicle for bringing people into Palestine. We are, in Israel, we perceived Jews under duress as manna from heaven. They are the new immigrants. They will come and will reside in the state. The state is open for any Jew, notwithstanding whether he has halachic credentials. Maybe he's real Jew or not Jew, who he was born, because if the Nazi does not distinguish what is Jewish, his mother is Jewish or his father is Jewish, we will not distinguish also. Everybody, the land is open. The land is open, and it's also a vehicle for settling the land as a security issue. Anti-Semitism was perceived in the minds of some Zionists as a way of saying, I told you so, come here, reside here, this is your home. Here you can claim home without any reservation. In the West, of course, anti-Semitism became unfashionable after World War II. You felt uncomfortable. So in the United States, you had very quickly a drive for greater integration. If the United States still saw Jews, if you look at in the eve of World War I, Jews wanted to integrate. The reform movement just wanted, they just didn't want to be Jewish at all. But the people kept Jewish clubs. They kept Christian clubs. They didn't integrate them. You could not be professor universities. You read Dan Oren's book, Joining the Club. You could not be. And Jews were driving themselves into, now it's an opportunity after World War II, because it was unfashionable. America was engulfed in a war, of course, of its own, a kind of a semi-civil war with, of course, African American trying to integrate after World War II as well. The whole second black emancipation came after World War II. Because how could it be that we fought against Nazism and fascism in Europe and still have the enslavement or Jim Crow laws in America? So there were two levels here of fighting. The Jews joining the blacks in the fight for emancipation in America, but also seeing what Israel is, and there were lots of tension emerging. Interesting enough. This tension were manipulated oftentimes. Because who do you claim loyalty to? To our own, to the new Jewish state? How much it can happen? And this was a very big time of also a rift between African American and Jewish American, but also a huge alliance between Martin Luther King, for example, and Malcolm X. Two different schools of thoughts. The churches were divided. In the Soviet Union, of course, the Jews became completely hostage as a result of the Israeli creation. Hostage in the sense that they are a minority, suspect minority, with short trials of doctors, all kind of stories about the old stories about Jews poisoning, etc., etc. All the stories of Christianity were superimposed in socialism. Anti-Semitism morphed in a different fashion, as I said. It was an indication of geopolitical rift as well. The fact that Israel chose to be with America in the Korean War made a shift in the policy of Stalin also vis-a-vis the Jews, etc., etc. And the borders were closed. Now, in France, for example, the Jews had to understand their new life as well. Keep in mind, France betrayed itself more than anything else when it turned the Jews to the Nazis. when France was occupied, the Vichy government broke the oath of emancipation and basically lowered the Jews to people who are not citizens and turned 80,000 of them to the Nazis for Auschwitz. To some French people until today, and when it was exposed and it was not talked about until the 70s when Paxton wrote his book, it was not talked. I write a lot about it. This was a mega terror against the Jews that basically broke France's idea of emancipation. When I visited France and I went to see the Klarsfelds, the Nazi hunters, and he documented, I have all the pictures, he documented the deportation of his father and all the 80,000. This was a huge trauma. How could France, our land, could do that? So there were geopolitical circumstances that changed the mindset of this issue constantly. Israel, as I said in my early remarks, did not address the issue of anti-Semitism in any fashion early on. It was completely preoccupied with sustaining and embellishing its own status as a state. A very small state, threatened by all sides of the Arab world. Annihilation was the word which was used in the Middle East. And no one trusted also in the West that this entity will survive this hostile Middle East. So obviously, regardless of the support given by the diaspora to the Jewish state, the fear was always that this is a temporary experiment. Because in any case, we have the history lessons that the first temple collapsed, the second temple collapsed, Bar Kokhba collapsed, now Israel will collapse. Everybody was speaking about the destruction of the third temple. This was exactly the language on the eve of the 67 war, the 6-day war. The 67 war, I grew up then. I was 11 years old. I was born in 1956, so you know how old I am. We dug graves in preparation for the calamity that became. And the world was watching. And Ramo Aron said, I don't know if I want to live after that, when de Gaulle said these Jews are whatever, arrogant. And the huge victory that came in 6 days of Israel basically destroying the entire Arab armies in a preemptive strike changed the entire mindset and the entire language of anti-Semitism and Jewish power. From total powerlessness to something of a mighty, powerful question. The Jew himself was suddenly perceived as powerful and not this victim, what they call in Yiddish Schneebech, this weakling Jew. Suddenly, he is the winner. How could it be? And a big winner. Defeating the Egyptian army, the Iraqi army, the Syrian army, conquering all this land. A huge transformation among world Jews. An explosion of messianic kind of perceptions. Something else happened. A return to history even more than the creation of the state itself. The language of anti-Semitism ever since will change from the idea of the weak, of the Holocaust, etc., to this powerful nation. The language of colonialism, the language of power, the language of occupation, all of those languages that came to be associated with the new anti-Semitism. One should not even underestimate this transformation. First of all, it transformed many Jewish communities around the world. Suddenly they could be proud of the sovereign entity. They didn't have to be apologetic about it. Especially in the United States. They understood that they could draw sustenance and identity from it. And this type of sustenance and identity and closeness will come to be identified as dual loyalty. How could you be so close to Israel? How much it comes at the expense of America? This debate began already in earnest in the late 60s. Will become even more heightened in the 70s and 80s. And as of later on, it becomes a huge issue with the Palestinian, and as you learn about the BDS, sort of how can you support Israel? You are against the values of modernity. And who speaks on behalf of the values of modernity and human rights? All those who debunk values of modernity and human rights in the Middle East and elsewhere. Quite amazing. But go explain it on college campuses, or go explain it to people who really don't have the picture altogether. It's very confusing. Because you always like to see the powerful as someone who is illegitimate vis-a-vis those who are being portrayed as powerless. This gave a justification for terrorism. This gave justification for global terrorism in the 70s, gave justification for the PLO terrorism in the 1970s, in the Munich, in Entebbe, in many places. As if this terrorism against the Jews is legitimate because they are powerful, suddenly. And it also gave virulent anti-Semitism legitimacy in other places, attacking Jews as the soft belly of the state of Israel. Suddenly Jews, wherever they may be, were target of, because they are associated with Israel. Notwithstanding whether they're associated or not, that's what happened. Anti-Semitism was, again, dwarfing into part of the global world between Third World and Second World, the East European and the West. We see, therefore, that anti-Semitism is a phenomena which is definitely attached to the global developments and to politics in many Western countries, and of course, in terms of the position of the Western civilization versus other civilizations. The issue of the Palestinians became suddenly entangled in everything which was done in the international scene. No other issue dominated the international scene as the Palestinians in any fashion. The fact that Israel was condemned in the United Nations 10 times more than any other country altogether on the issue of Palestinians was part of this kind of alliance against Israel, which became sort of the nemesis of the international system for Islamic states, for the Arab states, for third world countries who identified Israel as friend of America eventually. But as I suggested to you early on, the Israeli state evolved not by ignoring it altogether, but basically developing a creed. In any case, they hate us, so let's move on. Let's move on. Because you know what's the Jewish legacy. All the Jewish holidays are, they try to kill us, somehow we survive, let's go and eat now. That's Purim, that's Passover, it's Hanukkah, somehow we have survived, right? So, in any case, there is a story out there to be told. But this is not a matter of serendipity now. This is a matter of really sovereignty. This is a matter of sovereignty, of growing sovereignty, and this is also a matter of a division of labor between the Jews in the diaspora and the Jews of the State of Israel. What their vision? Do they have different vision? One is a sovereign vision, the other is people who are residing in their countries of citizenship, who they are belonging to, loyalty, lobbies, etc., etc. Completely different discourse. And as I said, then of course there is the Islamic radical discourse, which is unapologetic about the hate, kind of like blunt. The discussion, therefore, became also entangled with the modern liberal state. The modern liberal state supposed to deliver rights to its citizens, supposed to deliver respect for cultures, supposed to give recognition for difference. The Jewish issue was always a cue in that respect. How you treat the Jews. In the British case, of course, they did not know any minority but the Irish minority. The Jews were the second minority. Irish minorities they knew what to do with because they had land. But the Jews was a different story. When the Balfour Declaration came to be exactly 103 years ago, 2 years ago, many Jews in this country was livid. They were leery about it. Because we are not a nation, we are British people. If you say there is a homeland elsewhere, it means that we have to go there. They were afraid of that. How could you designate us as others? How could you suddenly say homeland for the Jews? We are here. Britain is our homeland. American Jews, of course, always said that they are not a nation. The Reform movement in America declared in the 1885 Pittsburgh Agreement that we are not a nation. We don't claim homeland. We are Americans, we are Jewish religion, and we are not even halachic religion. There is part of what we call the Americanization of religion. We are part and parcel of America. They refuse even to recognize the state of Israel. Remember, American Jewish Committee, which fights today against anti-Semitism all over the world, was anti-Zionist. The Reform movement were anti-Zionists. Fearing that being Zionists will label them as dual loyalty, doing everything in their power just to not be somewhat associated with people who want sovereignty. Only after sovereignty was enshrined, and only after the state created and became powerful in the 67 war, people suddenly started to hail it and say, okay, now we can speak with our head high. We can speak and see that we can be proud of a state. But this is not only proud, because the state also have issues. Have issues where there will be a Palestinian state, not a Palestinian state, and you constantly find yourself in the bind. Should I apologize for Israel behaving in a sovereign manner, that not giving the Palestinian rights? Should I apologize for the first intifada? What should I do? How should I handle myself? When Beinart writes, I will check my Zionism at the door of liberalism, that if Zionism will become aggressive, I will choose liberalism, I write back to him and I say, what remains of your Judaism? What does that mean? You have to make a choice. Why you have to make a choice? Why you constantly judge us as harsher as possible? Because you want to feel comfortable. As a universalist, well, Israel is very particularist. It's a very tough situation, internally speaking. Until you suddenly feel that notwithstanding your position in America, whether you're liberal or conservative, you are being attacked. Suddenly you feel under duress. If you're too liberal, you're attacked for being too universalist and not nationalist enough. If you are too conservative, you are attacked by the liberal for being too tribal. Very confusing. Israel, as I said, did not understand this issue of the diaspora for many years. The Israeli state did not address diaspora concerns. They addressed only sovereign concerns. When Begin signed an agreement with Anwar Sadat on a peace agreement in 1978-79 between Egypt and Israel, the head of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League in America, came to Begin and told him, you know, we have to fight for this anti-Semitism in Egypt. We're going to hear. In Egypt, viral anti-Semitism, hatred of the Jews. How can you sign a deal with them? Begin said, we sign deal with Egypt, state to state. Anti-Semitism will work itself out. It's the issue of the diaspora. When in 2001, all the world is assembling in Durban, in South Africa. This is after September 11. Attacking only Israel as violator of human rights. Israel want to send a minister. The diaspora said, don't send a minister. It's our issue. Anti-Semitism is not an Israeli issue, it's diaspora issue. You're a state. this becomes a very interesting division between the sovereign state and the Jewish people. Who speaks on behalf of the Jews? With what authority? And who listens? Very important question. Which organization? Anti-Semitism also became synonymous with other struggles as I described in the world. People started to argue, and that was a big kind of like rift in anti-Semitism, that the Jews are claim to victimhood in the Holocaust and others already exhausted itself. They're not victims. Israel is a state. They are basically blowing up what happened in the Holocaust. Holocaust deniers became a huge school of thought at the expense of Israel's sovereignty, arguing that Israel is so powerful, supposedly it itself perpetuates Holocaust of the Palestinians. Language has been inflated, language has been poisoned to the point of hating the Jews as if the Jews are committing crimes against humanity. And this became kind of like viral. The idea of anti-Semitism became so viral in the sense that Jews were becoming suddenly the villains. The idea of reversing history and reversing memory. Superimposing the Holocaust as if Israel is perpetuating it, which is unbelievable, but that's how it happened. And that gave additional legitimacy to claims to destroy the Jews altogether, including like in Iran. We're supposed to destroy them. We're supposed to kill them all. Anti-Semitism became a type of geopolitics until the Israeli state understood it. Officials of Israeli state understood it. It took them time. The playing with memory and collective memory is a very important idea in understanding the question of anti-Semitism. Who controls memory? Who defines it? Who defines the memory of evil? Who defines the memory of future consequences? How memory and the fight over memory becomes very important. When the Palestinians describe their own what they call disaster, the fall in the Nakba. Nakba is the disaster that befell on them when the state of Israel was created. They suddenly started to compare it to the Holocaust. Language was used in that terms. And this was regarded, and for good reason, as completely anti-Semitism because it gives legitimacy for the destruction of the Jews. When the Third World was engulfed in the 70s and 80s in a war between the West and the developing country, Palestinian struggle was injected into this language of the Third World. Don't forget that Gamal Abdel Nasser, the man who basically was the, I would say, the most charismatic leader of Egypt and the charismatic leader of the Third World, was the leader of the African Unity Organization. So the struggle against Israel and the struggle against Israel's sovereignty became the struggle of those people who are fighting colonialism. Another language was superimposed on the conditions. Israel is an outpost of colonialists. Who are the colonialists? Who knows? But they're outposts of colonialists. And every Jew supported them is an outpost of colonialists. Attacks were therefore becoming more and more legitimate to attack the Jews wherever they are because of their direct or indirect relations with Israel. This was the attacks in Europe in the 70s. These were the attacks eventually in Argentina, in Amia. These were attacks on remnants of Arab Jews in Syria, in Iran, everywhere. Anti-Semitism and the Jewish idea, the Jewish sort of like affinity with Israel, became justification for the new anti-Semitism. The struggle against anti-Semitism, initially in the Western world, was a struggle for greater inclusion of all groups. Remember, when Jewish Americans started to build their large institutions in the late 19th century, they built the B'nai B'rith, the American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress. All of these organizations were for integration of all groups. Jews always wanted to include all groups with them as part of conquering the liberal creed in America. They were universal, showing themselves never to be just defending themselves. But eventually, when these groups becoming more and more attached to Israel, they suddenly become suspect of too much attachment to Israel. And therefore, they're very sensitive to it. If you attended the conference like I did last June in Washington of the American Jewish Committee, the entire conference was dedicated to the struggle against anti-Semitism. You have been there?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. You saw people from Britain coming. You saw Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter. You saw an Iraqi dissident. They understand. This is a unified issue. It is not about Israel. It's about us and it's about the world. These world Jewish organizations trying to create this universal claim, oftentimes running into tension perhaps with the state of Israel, because these are different types of needs. One is the need to understand our communities, be it in Pittsburgh or in California, being attacked, and how you address this issue in America, and how you address this issue in France, and how you address this issue in England. And this is a different story. But to separate the case of Israel from the case of world Jews is also very superficial, as if they have different needs, as if these are different types of threats. Because in the minds and hearts of the nemesis of the Jews, they also always hold them the same. They never separate between Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews, just as they don't separate between ultra-Orthodox Jews, secular Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews. They don't. They don't understand the subtleties of this. The Jews is sort of like an expression of the significant or the insignificant other. You have to understand it when you do it. It's complicated. We are now at a very interesting juncture, in my opinion, that is leading us to lots of thoughts, and I would say one has to be honest where we are in terms of like the condition of the Jews. On the one hand, I would argue here, without reservation, that the Jewish condition was never, ever better than it is now. Primarily because there is a very strong Jewish state. As I suggested early on in my comments, the vast majority of the Jews soon will reside in a sovereign state. That's in itself a revolution. Jews in the world are not subject to massive killing anywhere. One should, say, oh, this is great. Yeah, it's great. Israel